Hi, everyone. So for people who are already on the call or on YouTube, we'll just wait for a few more minutes to have people coming in, and then we'll start officially in just a few minutes. Okay, I think we will get started now because it's 3:03, right on time. So welcome everybody to Ada Lovelace Week. If you're not here for opening plenary yesterday, it is, can everyone hear me? Okay, Elizabeth, can you hear me now? Okay, okay, I'll go continue. So this is a series of events hosted by Human Computer Integration Lab at University of Chicago. So this is our second day of event where we focus on industry panel. We invited Philippa Ngaju and Elizabeth Koprucki to share with us their journey in technology and also in electronics. So using these events, we really want to celebrate women and non-binary in tech to hear their story and also communicate like experience and lead to some like really valuable discussion. And just a heads up for tomorrow at the same time, we have our art panel where we spotlight Ashing Sparrow and Snowshoe to talk about their experience in arts. And for Friday, we invited two professors to be our panelists at academia panel. They're Alan Yulun Do and Marshini Chatty. So before we really kickstarting the full event today, I really want to say a huge thanks to our organizing team. So big shout out to Jasmine, Jazz, Dasha, Zoe, and Pedro. We really like planning around throughout the whole summer, finding speakers, connecting everything, and then popping out. So huge thanks for them. We also have 4 really amazing volunteers helping out through this whole weeks of events. So huge thanks to Alex, Shan-Yuan, Romance, Livana. You'll see them on the Zoom call as well. Last but not least, this event is impossible without our sponsors. So thank you for Department of Computer Science, Physical Science Division, Center for Data Computing at University of Chicago. Okay, so let's jump into our panel today. So for today, we have 2 speakers, and they will each give a 10 minutes presentation about their experience and work. And after that, we will open up for Q&A. So if you have any questions during their presentation, feel free to either write it in the text box in the chat of the Zoom, or if you are on YouTube, feel free to leave it in the comment sections. So I will bring up all of the questions we got from Zoom and YouTube, and then have our 2 panelists to giving the answers. And also after their presentation, you can also feel free to unmute yourself for if you want to directly ask your question to our panelists. Okay, so let's start with our first talk for the day. So our first talk is brought by Philippa Makobore. She is the department head of the Instrumental Division at the Uganda Industrial Research Institute. Her core expertise is the design of electronic devices that are appropriate and affordable for low resource contexts in healthcare. She is also a member of various different kind of communities, such as IEEE Engineering, Medicine, Biology Society, IEEE Women Engineering, Uganda Section founder. So let's start with her talk. I will stop sharing my screen now, and Philippa, feel free to jump in and share your presentation back.
Thank you, Yuji, for the introduction, and thank you very much to the organizers of this event. It's an honor for me to talk to you. So I'm going to be speaking about building local innovation capacity to enhance healthcare delivery. So the presentation of the outline of my presentation is I'll start with the importance of clinical needs assessments. I'll talk about appropriate and affordable medical devices that we have been developing at Uganda Industrial Research Institute, the role of the Institute in the advancement of medical devices within Uganda and East Africa. Then I'll talk about our flagship device, which is the electronically controlled gravity feed infusion set, and then wrap up with the potential impact on the healthcare system. So in terms of clinical needs assessments, all the work that we do is needs driven, and it's because of the unique constraints in our settings. So in the picture, we can see that we were interviewing some clinicians and trying to understand the entire infusion process, from the moment when the nurse acquires the materials, the fluid giving set, the bag, to the all the way to the end when they actually deliver the therapy to the patients. So we want to understand where all the pain points are and where the challenges are, especially to do with tools that are available for clinicians, because this is a very big challenge, especially in low and middle income countries. So we also need to assess existing devices. So we need to know exactly what diagnostic therapeutic tools are available for the clinicians and why they aren't effective, if there are any. Then also we use user-centric design. We ensure that all our devices are easy to use and also easy to maintain, which is extremely important, especially for resource-constrained contexts. So we believe in the design philosophy of designing with the end user as opposed to designing for, which is usually what happens for most of the medical devices that are on the market. We also ensure that we are directly aligned with some of the goals of our government. So the Uganda National Development Plan, we ensure that we develop aligned with government resources and policies that favor the development of some of those devices. So in terms of appropriate and affordable medical devices, as I had mentioned earlier, we are focusing on low middle income contexts, and there are a lot of design constraints we need to consider when we're looking at developing a tool for a clinician. So things to do with the power supply. We have a lot of rural facilities that are off the power grid. So how are we going to ensure the sustainability and the efficacy of a particular device if it's implemented in a rural community? We also have issues to do with usability. I did mention that earlier. A lot of the devices that are on the market are very feature heavy, and sometimes some of those features are unnecessary for some of the contexts that we want to implement. We also look at the modular approach of design, and I'll talk a little bit more about that with our flagship device. So designing module by module is quite helpful, especially for maintenance and troubleshooting. So mostly the post-market kind of services that are very important to ensure the sustainability. We're also looking at trying to build capacity to manufacture within the country. There are some limitations there, but at least if we can do the bulk of the design and the initial prototyping and manufacturing within the country, that would really go a long way in ensuring accessibility of these devices. And we also work in multidisciplinary groups. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Both locally and internationally, we've collaborated with very diverse organizations to co-design some of these devices. So in terms of UIRI's role in the advancement of medical devices, about 6 to 7 years ago, we embarked on trying to assess where the gaps were in the healthcare sector and trying to look at which tools we could design based on the needs that we had identified. And this is just a snapshot of some of the devices we've been developing. We have come up with a low-cost diagnostic tool for pneumonia, which measures 3 parameters. We're looking at pulse oximetry, so oxygen, blood oxygen saturation, respiratory rate, as well as heart rate, all multiplexed in one particular device. We've also designed a biosensor for aflatoxin B1 to detect aflatoxin B1. And this is a particular challenge in our setting. It's relatively humid, and when grain is stored, it's usually prone to actually growing a fungus called aflatoxin. And in small doses, it's not very harmful, but in larger doses, it can actually lead to cancer. So this is quite a big challenge with post-harvest medical issues. We've also developed an automated infusion set, as I had mentioned earlier. I'll be talking a bit more in detail about that. The electronically controlled gravity feed infusion set, which we've abbreviated to ECGF. It is a mouthful, and we are thinking of a much better name, which would be better for marketing in the future. We've also developed an infant warmer. So this is the carrier of the warmer, but inside we have a heating pad, and we also have sensors to measure the temperature of the infant as well as the temperature of the heating pad to ensure that we're able to reactivate that and replace it as needed. So I'll talk about our case study, which is the ECGF device, and I'll start with the clinical challenge that we're trying to address. So just to give you a feel of the gravity of the situation in terms of delivering intravenous therapy, over 10% of children in East African hospitals require immediate intravenous therapy. And that's quite a large number. And what happens is intravenous fluids are currently manually delivered, meaning a clinician actually has to set the flow rate and continuously monitor the flow rate to ensure it is delivered at the correct parameters. But a bigger challenge is the fact that we have inadequate healthcare workers. We have a doctor-to-patient ratio of 1 to almost 25,000, and we have a nurse-to-patient ratio of 1 to 11,000. So this is quite problematic. So unfortunately, the patient safety is compromised, and there's definitely need for us to innovate in this particular area. In terms of medical equipment, we receive a lot of donated equipment. Most of that equipment is not calibrated before it's shipped. We don't have the manuals in order to troubleshoot in case something goes down. And a lot of this equipment is obsolete, it's being phased out. So in terms of accessing spare parts, that is quite problematic as well. So the donations, as much as they do mean well, sometimes it can be an added compounded problem to this situation. So our solution was to come up with an infusion controller, a gravity-fed infusion controller, which can safely deliver intravenous fluids and drugs. And through the automation of the process would be saving significantly precious clinician time that's associated with the manual regulation of infusion therapy. So just to give you a snapshot of the features of the device, we are using dynamic flow rate control. So we have an optical sensor, which is detecting the flow rate in real time. And subsequently, we have an actuator, which is restricting the tubing and constantly sensing the actual flow rate. So the restriction is dynamic. And we've implemented several key features in terms of alarms for under infusion, over infusion, slow, rapid, free flow, as well as faulty and unplugged sensor alarms, which is a unique feature to cater for our design constraints. We have very congested wards, so the possibility that a sensor can get unplugged is quite high. So we implemented that feature, and for faulty sensors, it eases the troubleshooting. We also implemented occlusion, bubble detection, a very simple user interface with a keypad, and step-by-step processes with safety gates to ensure that the patient is protected. It's battery operated, and the fact that it's gravity fed, it's considerably lower in terms of power consumption. And we also integrated a charging bed, which uses both solar power and AC mains, meaning that it would be accessible in rural settings. We are hoping the production cost will be between $100 and $150 US. At this stage, we've just costed the consumables, and it's roughly about $350 US. But as you can see, we've used some expensive processes like 3D printing. So hopefully at scale, when we introduce other production methods such as injection molding, we could drive that cost further down. We've also used the expertise of industrial designers throughout our design process, and this was particularly helpful in the prototyping and testing phase. So using design processes for research was very helpful, especially when we're trying to determine what kind of features the actuator would look like, and the restriction mechanism, and we're able to test different tools to see which one would work optimally. This is just another one of those meetings we had with the designers, and we were looking at an initial cardboard prototype for our actuator. We also have infrastructure to do in-house development. So the entire device has been manufactured within our institute. We have a mechanical engineering facility where we fabricated the user interface casing, as you can see here. And then this is one of my colleagues prototyping the power supply and testing it. So in terms of our preclinical study, we had to test the reliability and the performance of the device, especially also simulating some conditions to ensure adequate safety. And the longer the therapy, the better. So we needed to sample actually timestamps from the second hour and the last hour. And we plotted error margins. So we're looking at the deviation between the prescribed and the actual flow rate that was desired. So we're able to use the trumpet algorithms to plot these curves, and we were able to acquire satisfactory results before we proceeded with our clinical studies. So this is one of my colleagues training clinicians on the device. We've gotten a lot of feedback, especially from our clinical studies, and we're looking at improving some of these features because there were some challenges with installing the drop sensor unit. So in terms of our clinical studies, we had designed our study to determine the utility of the ECGF and also initial safety. So we started with an adult study. We enrolled 12 patients from the infectious diseases ward at Mulago National Referral Hospital, which is our main hospital in Uganda. And we were able to achieve an error margin of plus or minus 7% with the adults. Then we did a larger pediatric study in the western region of Uganda, and were able to achieve an error margin of plus or minus 10%. And this was because most of the therapies were significantly shorter than the adult therapies. We didn't have any serious adverse events related to IV therapy. However, we did observe the usual clinical issues to do with intravenous therapy like phlebitis and difficulty in accessing veins with insertion of cannulas, and sometimes some adverse drug reactions. The device sensitivity was acceptable in terms of the alarms, and we got positive feedback in terms of the usability. So in terms of the global market for infusion pumps, as much as we've designed specifically for the low resource setting, it is really important to note that the African market is only 1.9% of the total market for infusion pumps, and Europe and North America still comprises the largest share. There's an expected cumulative annual growth rate of 5.9% in this industry between 2020 and 2027. And we're also looking at how this device can be used in the home care business sector for the developed world. So we're really hoping to have more or less different products that can target different markets to ensure the sustainability at scale. So just to wrap up with takeaway messages from my talk, there is a need to build local capacity in order for us to create a conducive and favorable ecosystem for the development of appropriate technologies. And it's important that these technologies are accessible in terms of cost, also ease of maintenance, and it's also important to sustain improved health outcomes through multidisciplinary co-design of medical devices. And also the leveraging of specialized skills can significantly fast-track development of technology. Just thanking our sponsors and our supporters for our project, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Philippa. It's really great to hear about your work and potential impact it can have. If you don't mind, I'll stop your screen share. I will go ahead and introduce our second speaker for today, which we have Elizabeth Koprucki. So she serves the assistant director of Fab Lab Design at University of Chicago, Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. She managed the Polsky Center's Fab Lab, where she mentors entrepreneurs and researchers through the prototyping process. She also oversees Fab Lab's programming and staffing, connects Polsky Exchange member with resources on campus and across Chicago. So we'll welcome Elizabeth to start her presentation, and we'll have Q&A for both of our panelists at the end.
Excellent, thank you. There we go. Thank you for inviting me to speak among such great folks. And Philippa, that was an amazing presentation. So, as mentioned, I work at the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship at University of Chicago. So in my talk, I'm going to introduce what we do at the Polsky Center in the Fab Lab. I'm going to talk about some of our case studies and also discuss the ways that that has changed in a post-COVID-19 reality. But first, there we go. First, a little bit about me. My background is coming from art and design, starting out in graphic design and then becoming involved in the maker movement in Chicago, and really excited to see the different ways that people are combining art, science, and technology. I was able to quickly go from feeling like a newbie who knew about the software at least, to being asked for my advice, to working with folks to build machines. So one of my gigs as a maker professional was at the Chicago Public Library. And you can see here, the photo on screen is of me and a group of 5 other people holding up a machine. It's a framework that moves in 3 dimensions and it has a pen attached. So this is actually the first job of this machine, which is proving that it can move by having a pen attached. I've worked with a number of different age groups, from first graders through adults, and currently now am staff at University of Chicago. So I'm at the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. We represent all of entrepreneurship at the university. So that includes our business plan competitions and activities at the Booth School of Business. We've been running the New Venture Challenge for 25 years now this year. That includes my colleagues over in our tech commercialization and licensing, aka Polsky Science and Tech. So when researchers invent things, making sure that can be licensed to a company that might want to use it or to be turned into a company. So one of the questions that I think for today was sort of development of technology, how does that interact with industry? And this is one way that we get new technologies out there. The part of the Polsky Center I work with is our exchange, which is started as a space and a fab lab and a community of people across the university and the wider community, especially on the Mid-South side of Chicago, to bring people together who are working on entrepreneurship so that they could share their learnings and share their skills. So I have on the screen is a photo or is a screenshot of our website and highlighting the fall cohort of the George Shultz Innovation Fund, one of our many, many programs that is funding early stage research that's beginning to be commercialized. And I've had a few of those Innovation Fund companies use the Fab Lab. I'll actually highlight one in a little bit. Here's a view of one part of our Fab Lab. So this is looking into the wood shop. This is about 2,000 square foot space on 53rd Street in Chicago. And we're looking into the wood shop and showing some workspace, a bandsaw, and in the distance is a large computer numerically controlled router. So this is our space for doing larger scale and messier prototyping. And there is a table, there's a table in assembly on top of the work table. And that was designed by one of Team Fab Lab's interns, and it represents space warping around a black hole. This is kind of our statement. The Fab Lab offers expertise and a suite of tools to support entrepreneurs, innovators, and ecosystem partners as they translate ideas into tangible form. So although I've worked with people designing services and designing software, and some of the same prototyping processes apply. The core of what we've done so far has been working with physical products. Some of our tools, and this is a photo from when we were doing an event with Open House Chicago, or Chicago Ideas Week, there we go. So we have design software working with 2D and 3D design, 3D, a few different kinds of plastic 3D printers for working in things that aren't plastic, the laser cutter for cutting two-dimensional sheets of thin material, the vinyl cutter for custom decals and branding, our computer numerically controlled routers. Those are subtractive tools for cutting shapes out of wood and aluminum, and then wood sharp support tools and electronics bench for testing electronics using microcontrollers, etc. So one of the companies I worked with was one called Newborn Medical. This was founded by Dr. Caitlin McGrafton, John Lindsay, and Kyle Dahlstrom. And this was a team spanning a clinician from Northwestern and some students from Booth, one of whom had a background, at least one of whom had a background in electrical engineering. The goal of this was to have a smart baby bottle that detects feeding difficulties in preterm infants. So that this is the biggest challenge for a preterm infant to be able to go home, is simply to make sure that they are feeding correctly and detect issues with this, and also to do it in a way where you don't have to expose the infants to too much radiation. So with our 3D printing capabilities, we were able to prototype simulating silicone, and you can kind of see there's a image on the screen behind, I believe that's John Lindsay, and showing this is a baby bottle that has a reusable sensor pack that is attached. And they did a number of the programs in the Polsky Center that my colleagues and I work with. The NSF's I-Core cohort, they were able to do their customer discovery. They were a finalist in the New Venture Challenge, and then finally getting $200,000 in the George Shultz Innovation Fund, I mentioned. So with that, they also worked to license the technology with our technology commercialization group. So that was a really interesting cross-Polsky example of prototyping, developing this new technology. And we certainly have had lots of interest from folks who are working with medical devices. These were the speakers from an event I did called Made in the Fab Lab Science Edition. And this was across the sciences at University of Chicago. And I have another event coming up in about a month that is going to be medical edition. This was very specifically not talking about medicine in humans, because I could have done a whole nother event. So we have here Mason Dearborn from molecular engineering, and he was exploring polymerization reactions in a collaboration with University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, trying to find something that could be more energy efficient for making composites for things like aerospace than what's currently done, which are absolutely huge, energy intensive autoclaves. So he 3D printed some molds that he used in research in the Fab Lab. We have Kelsey Stilson, who's from biological sciences, exploring the evolution of nerves in the jaws of possums, research that could hopefully translate to innovations and help in human dentistry. So she used some of our electronics equipment and sensors. And then Nadeep Hasheen in our physical sciences division, looking at physical metamaterials. So these are materials that have special properties by virtue of their structure. And she 3D printed and laser cut networks where if you squish one side of the network, then instead of pushing out on the other sides, all parts of the network will squish together. So these models were done using Fab Lab equipment in 2 and 3 design. And my last case study was a consumer product. So this is Luminade, which is founded by Anna Stork and Andrea Shrestha. And my intern, Mitchell Neal, also interned with them. So using the laser cutter and 3D printer, he created and prototyped new product designs. And you can see some of the designs on the page were what were about to be cut on the laser cutter and then turned into these star-shaped lanterns. So 3D, I appreciated Philippa's last talk talking about cardboard prototyping, 3D printing, and a variety of technologies used to create the device, and also recognizing that those can be quite expensive. And with this, we did a number, while working in a much higher resourced area, we worked through a number of iterations of prototyping, including starting with paper. So this is what we were. We were a physical space where you could have a lot of people in the same area. Here we're working on a design thinking workshop up in the top left of a number of scientists and designers who are coming together and figuring out how they can work together to prototype. And in this spring, this was no longer a safe option. So with some of my other colleagues at the University of Chicago, I worked on some different COVID-19 related projects. One of them was Dr. Peter Eng's N95 mask disinfecting. So this disinfecting rig, so this uses UV light, and in the Fab Lab, we 3D printed a couple of brackets that actually hold the different UV bulbs so that you can pass through these masks at the time when there was an intense shortage and disinfect them in about a minute. And then on the right, Fab Lab came home with me. So this is one of our 3D printers, and we were 3D printing face shield frames and working with an organizer in the maker community who was working with hospitals on the south and west side and distributing face shield frames to first responders and people in those hospitals that needed them. So we probably, my partner and I probably printed about 800 of these frames until luckily there was no longer a demand. So here's how you can find more information about the Polsky Center. We do continue to have lots of public online events. So our entrepreneurship mentoring and events continue. Currently the Fab Lab is closed, but I'm happy to do design consultations with folks and refer them to other resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So now we are opening up to our Q&A session. So feel free to drop your question in the chat or just unmute yourself. I think everyone can unmute themselves now. Since I'm the moderator, I will just take the advantage of asking the first question, honestly. So it's really nice to hear both of you your awesome work. My question is how did you identify your career track and devote so many time and energy into this specific career track? Because I understand all of audiences are still students and trying to navigate their careers, what they want to do. Just curious about when you were a little younger, how do you identify, oh, this is what I want to do for 10 years, for 20 years?
Okay, you want to go first, Philippa?
Well, you can go first. I can go after.
Okay, so I grin when I hear this question, and it's a good question. I say that I could not have gone to school for what I do, and that's not 100% true. People do come to running maker spaces from engineering, from art, from design, from library science. And I still could not get a specific degree in running a prototyping space. That being said, my training in graphic design, so I majored in graphic design, minored in art history and sociology, and I've used literally all of that as a maker professional, especially the knowledge of iteration and the importance of the design process, as well as knowing some of the software, was very valuable for me in coming into this. But it's been the other basically, I had a chance to pursue this as a career during a time when desktop 3D printing was getting popular. There was more interest in places like libraries and museums and schools in having maker programs. So it was definitely a fortunate time. But it was also recognizing my interest in science and technology and finding out how to combine that with art, and then also combine that with an interest in teaching people. So it was kind of identifying an intersection of all of my interests and identifying a need in the market.
I'd say, well, I started my first degrees in electrical engineering, and I actually didn't know that I would be designing in the healthcare space. So I studied in Canada, and when I went back home, that's when I realized there was such a huge gap in terms of tools for clinicians. I didn't realize how bad it was. And there we are with our skills and an opportunity for us to make a difference. And I think for me, it's very fulfilling because I really wanted to have a sense of purpose, not just to be designing anything for any sector. I really wanted to have that purpose, and I found my passion designing tools for healthcare. So I always say that when I came back home, that's when I found my actual career path. So then I ended up doing a master's in biomedical engineering later, which obviously facilitated my work further. So that's more or less my journey.
Thank you so much. It's really great to hear both of the journey, not like as planned expected, but really goes well, like toward the end, like a really good track for both of you. So if any of like the audiences want to unmute yourself, feel free to do so. I'll just be quiet for like a couple of seconds. If no one's actually jumping in, I have like a full list of questions on my mind, honestly, to ask. So hopefully you don't want me to do that, because that's all my questions, not yours, I guess. Okay, then my next question is surrounding like mentorship. So I know like along the way to like pursue a career, it's really important to have like your mentors. Just curious if you have like any mentors in your career path, and also do you have any advice for students want to find their mentors? How should they like reach out, or what should be like a healthy like a mentorship like relationships be like?
Maybe I'll go first. I have several mentors, a lot of them professors in biomedical engineering, and it's interesting how I met them. It was through work networks. And I think when you're passionate about something, you obviously want to advance your skills, you want to grow your network, you need to get funding to support your projects. So through those interactions, you end up identifying key people who would definitely add a lot of value to what you're doing. So in terms of trying to seek a mentor, obviously it has to be someone who has a wealth of experience in the particular area that you're interested in. And as a mentee, you have to be very proactive. I don't think you should expect them to be reaching out to you that much. They will from time to time, but they are very busy people, and you know, time is obviously quite precious on their side. So I think just reaching out to them and doing the bulk of the work, and there'll definitely be room there for them to guide you along that path.
Yeah, I've also, one of the things I say is that when I first came to a makerspace, that I was lucky that people talk to me like a human being. And it really, finding a community where people like to share their knowledge, first starting out with technical things, how to 3D print, building a computer numerically controlled router was really helpful. I've also, and as I've gone along in my career, I've found value from talking to people in other fields. So both with the technical content as well as ways to think about advancing my career and operating in different professional contexts. So I second the recommendation to do most of the work. I think there are some really great networks available. So with the Polsky Center, with other centers like us, there are people who really like mentoring and who are available to meet with people. I know that's the case in other membership spaces like MHub in Chicago and other university entrepreneurship centers. And there are also professional organizations. So as a graphic designer, I really appreciated AIGA, the Professional Organization for Design. Now I'm a member of Women in Bio, and I found that to be very valuable in terms of people to talk to. And I would also say, I'd second the recommendation to reach out, prepare for meetings, have specific questions, and also sorting through advice is sort of one of those things that takes a bit to learn. But, we say with companies interacting with our mentors, it's a little bit of a matchmaking process. And there may be some people that you, like anything else, that you work with better than others.
Nice. So we have questions on the Zoom chat from Jazz. So Jazz, do you want to unmute yourself and ask by yourself, or want me to read it out?
Sure, I can read it.
Nice.
So that's kind of like, there's similar questions, but it's one for Philippa and one for Elizabeth. So for Philippa, when you noticed this need in your home country, did you feel like you had to create that infrastructure or community as like a necessary step, or was there kind of like those networks already existent / were they receptive in Uganda? And then for Elizabeth, how do you kind of build a community of active users in your space and maintain that kind of engagement over time?
Okay, I'll start. Well, the biomedical engineering space in Uganda is still quite nascent, so there was definitely a need to build infrastructure and also to start developing prototypes that we could take through the entire medical device life cycle process, because it does take a bit of time from an idea that has a clinical application to market. And there are several challenges, issues to do with medical device regulations. We have certain issues that our country maybe doesn't have lab capacity to test for certain devices, so that may have to be outsourced. Then issues to do with the clinical studies. Actually, so some of our institutional review boards were not familiar with investigative devices that were developed within the country. So actually my team and I were actually the ECGF was one of the first few devices that actually went through that entire path all the way to clinical validation. It was one of the first few devices that went through that process. So we're really trying to chart a path where other innovators could follow. And being a research institute, our mandate is to support academia and also bridge the gap between academia and industry. So we have a component where we train students and give them hands-on skills. At the same time, we're trying to kind of spur this new kind of industry in terms of, medical device development, especially hardware, because we have so many software solutions in low resource settings, so many apps, but there are very few actual hardware products that are being manufactured. So it was very challenging, but the amazing thing is there's almost like a boom in terms of healthcare innovation now in Uganda, and we have a very strong, close-knit community and a lot of international support. So that really does go a long way in trying to push that agenda.
So building a community of active users is one of the things that I am really passionate about, and have actually had the chance to speak at a conference. And it's taken time. So the first thing was actually doing what I call a 3D printer roadshow, of getting a small 3D printer based on some events I had done in other spaces, and actually putting it somewhere and running it and talking to people. And I found that generally, if there was a 3D printer running, people would come and talk to me. This is actually inspired by the founder of MakerBot, bringing a 3D printer to bars around South by Southwest. So then we really worked to build the Fab Lab and Polsky Exchange as a whole, as a place that was welcoming and a place that people could come in without previous experience. So some of that was, first of all, to do events like the Ideas Week or some of our other orientations to invite people into the space. We learned that it wasn't enough to just open the door. You have to invite people in and listen to what people are interested in and try to communicate where the Fab Lab would be valuable for them. We also, we did an orientation to have everyone start on the same page and also have a chance to meet some of the other users in the Fab Lab. And then we also worked hard, especially in our introductory materials, to have less jargon and really talk clearly about why someone would want to use the thing and how it could be valuable, and as well as have the safety information, and then the technical information can come later. And this is something that's been an ongoing process, and something I think about now with virtual space, and I think all of us working on Polsky programs are thinking of how do you continue building community. So just case studies highlighting the work that people have done, getting permission for introductions of like, oh, you're working on something. I had somebody worked on something similar, and then also the members of Team Fab Lab. So since we opened in 2015, I've hired 16 student interns and 4 community interns, one of whom works for me full time now. And with all of them, the goal was they're hired for communication and for curiosity and for showing up and willingness to show up and do the thing. Some of them did not come in with previous experience on the equipment. And we've generally found, and other similar spaces have found, that technical knowledge can be taught more easily than communication skills can be taught. So the fact that we have, someone come in and say, wow, I've never done this before, and a staff member could say, hey, that's great. I just learned how to do this last month. Let me show you, and still remember what that experience of being new was like.
That was awesome. So we have another question in the Zoom chat from Zoe. Not sure if Zoe, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question by yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. It was really inspiring, and I'm sure you will inspire many audience who are females and gender minorities. I'm just wondering if you had any female idols that encourage you to keep working on what you are doing, because I think to many people, when they talk about entrepreneurs, the stereotypes might be a big man with suits and ties and that. So I'm just wondering if you had any kind of journey that you want to share with us. Thanks.
I can go on this one. When I started thinking about pivoting my career to science communication and to STEM communication, I actually put up little pictures of people who inspired me, some of whom I've met. So with Lamore Freed from Adafruit, aka Lady Ada, Emily Pillaton from Project H Design, and I'm forgetting the name of one of her other projects. She was someone who's featured in Make Magazine. Emily Lakdawala, formerly from the Planetary Society, who I've met in terms of amazing science communication. Robbie Amias, who's been at the Science Education Department of Museum of Science and Industry, I find very inspiring. And I am forgetting her last name, but the digital fabrication editor from Make Magazine, and then also she's very active with the Fab Network. I'd also say Sherry Lassiter from the Global Fab Lab Network. So yeah, they're out there. And one of the things, I mentioned Rabia, one of her points has always been people are having this conversation about diversity and equity and inclusion and have been having it longer than I've been a part of it. So to highlight, it can be hard to, when looking at representation and where people are not included, to also highlight where people are and not erase the people already doing the work.
Philippa, do you also want to pick up on these questions, or you want to skip it?
Yes, actually, some of my female idols are not really, they're not really in the engineering space, but I'm just inspired by a lot of the work that they do and their leadership, like Christine Lagarde, the IMF director, and also there's Winnie Byanyima. She's currently the head of UNAIDS. She's Ugandan, and she was previously the head of Oxfam. She's an aeronautical engineer, one of the first aeronautical engineers in Uganda, but then she went into the more policy area. But there are two people that have really inspired me.
Nice. Okay, we have one more question from the Zoom from Preeti. Preeti, do you want to read your questions?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thank you so much, both of you. It has been an amazing talk and I enjoyed hearing about your work. So I have a question for Philippa. So I'm really interested in the field of medical tech from the very beginning of my bachelor's. And I'm curious that, do you have any other target applications in the medical domain that you're aiming at? And how do you usually approach such tasks in a longer term? What are your plans?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, we have a couple of other projects that we're working on. I think we usually meet new collaborators either at conferences or we've presented a talk and they're doing similar work, and that's how we end up working on new projects. But there's one in particular. We're looking at mobile diagnostics for infectious diseases and kind of having multiplexed kind of a system where you have a microfluidic strip that is doing the diagnosis, and then that is being relayed, the information is being relayed via the mobile phone. So that's quite interesting. Well, usually I think the first step is, if you're embarking on a healthcare innovation, is to determine the level of risk. So if you're developing a piece of hardware, is it going to be patient contacting, or is it going to be emitting some form of energy that is going to interface with the patient, so that you're able to determine the level of risk, because that really informs the development cycle and the processes that you need to go through. And yes, there are also regulatory issues that you need to look into. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of the FDA guidelines on some of the restrictions of some of those devices. So there are ways to work around it. You could maybe, for example, have a device that's used for humanitarian contexts, and you're able to expedite some of those processes. So it's a number of things that you need to think about. But also I'd like to share that we do have a resource. We have a platform called UBORA, spelled U-B-O-R-A. So I can share the website on the chat. but it's more or less, it's one of our other projects where we're looking at the co-creation of open source medical devices. But the platform also has inbuilt algorithms where you can quickly do a Q&A and determine the level of risk of your device. And it also gives you a snapshot of some of the medical device standards that you'd need to adhere to. And it's a collaborative platform, so there are clinicians on there, there are developers, and you're able to co-create these devices. So it's also a very nice tool. There are several similar platforms out there, but at least that's the one that I was heavily involved in and did some of the design work. So it's also a good starting place to get your feet wet and see exactly what is entailed in coming up with the medical device innovation.
Nice, it sounds really awesome. I think we are right on time of like 4 o'clock to end this event. Thanks again for both speakers for sharing their experience. If any of the audience have more questions, I think our panelists also leave their contact information. Feel free to reach out to them. And just a reminder that we have 2 more days of events, same time, same Zoom. Tomorrow we will have our arts panel, and on Friday we will have our academia panel. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you all for coming in, and yeah, happy Wednesday.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.